Why, hello there. Welcome to our new educational series with Nobel Trading. My name's Josh. I'm the founder. Today, we're going to lay the framework for macroeconomics, get a better understanding of that, what globalization is, and what it means for today's economic environment. So let's just hop right into it. I'm a big subscriber to the belief that history doesn't tend to repeat, but it does tend to rhyme. So if I'm trying to figure out what's going on today, I like to have some sort of historical precedent that I can look back to that's similar to it so that I can have a better expectation of what's occurring today. So to really efficiently do that, we have to go all the way back to World War I and kind of paint the picture of what's going on here. The British Empire is reigning dominant, but there's a new world power tied on their heels, and that's the Germans. The tensions between these two countries keeps building and building up until the assassination of Duke Ferdinand. What this does is it triggers the First World War, which is also the end of gentlemanly combat. Remember, gentlemanly combat, both armies line up, they then fight one another. There's this gentleman agreement that this is how we will always have our engagements. That goes away, wars become way more expensive, and this is the first time that we see countries really break away from the gold standards so that they continue to fund war. This is a trend that continues all the way into the modern day, where we continue to break away from the gold standard to fund very expensive things like war. So with the end of World War I, we get the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles included a huge fine on the Germans for $500 billion. For this time period, it's completely unpayable. What this causes is the German to have to base their own currency, which causes hyperinflation and an economic collapse, which then leads to tons of resentment and the eventual rise of Hitler. Soon after, we then get World War II, the bloodiest war that we've seen to date. 70 million people died during this time period, although it was also paired with a huge technological boom. So coming out of the war, we also saw massive increases in population. Everyone's feeling euphoric, things are better now, we won, and everyone starts having babies. Hence, the big boomer generation is then born. Let's keep in mind that this is the largest generation to date. The US population grew by 40%, the global population grew by 30%. This is huge, and more on that in a moment. So also during the war, we also had all these agreements that created unity across the world powers. This includes the Bretton Woods Agreement, the UN Agreement, GATT, which is a general agreement on tariffs and trade, and NATO, which of course is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which you've been hearing a lot lately with everything going on in Russia and Ukraine. And finally, in 1952, we also had the formation of the EU, which then leads us to post-war agreements, which includes the New Deal, which was a unprecedented move that we've never seen before. Now, the New Deal was supposed to be for yield control and to allow inflation to run hot to lower debt burdens. Remember, if inflation goes up, debt is less significant. And then lastly, the Marshall Link, which was a plan to help rebuild Germany and Japan. Basically, we learned our lessons from the First World War, and we didn't want to create a new Hitler. But let's not be too quick to breeze over that Bretton Woods system that we talked about, though. America was essential in the conceptualization of that. What it did was peg all of the global currencies to the US dollar, which is a big factor in how we hold our global dominance now. Basically, this is how we became the global dominant currency. So emerging from all of this is what is referred to as globalization, or what I like to refer to as a rules-based system. And so this is basically everyone saying, okay, we need to work together. This is how we're going to work out our differences in the future. And this is how we're going to interact with one another when it comes to different trades or tariffs. So leading out of that, we then get the 50s and 60s, which people like to say is the golden era. We had that massive population boom that we talked about earlier, which led to a big economic boom. We had all those technologies that were made during the war that then find different usabilities in retail markets, and this leads to this huge surge and growth. So then following that, in the late 1960s, we then get the boomers entering the workforce, and by the 70s, they're the largest workforce that we've ever seen. Meaning productivity is super high, everyone's making a ton of money and they're spending it, and we get the largest demand shock that we've ever seen in the economy, which then also led to big spikes in healthcare, which has led to actually a lot of the issues that we have today. During this time period, America actually couldn't keep up with the inflation, and we actually broke off the gold standard once again, which has led us to the current economic environment that we're in now. And the reason we did that is because the dollar had literally become too valuable. It was too taxing on the economy and too taxing on prices. And this also causes a big economic debate that even occurs today, which is that wages started to stop keeping up with inflation. Now, some people argue this and say, well, if you actually factor in the benefits that people get with their jobs, wages do keep up with inflation. But the straight amount that you're paid today actually is not keeping up with inflation. So if you do a calculation to figure out what real wages are, they've only increased by about 33% over the past 50 years, which is ridiculous if you compare it to the GDP that was growing through that time period. And the reason why this didn't completely destroy us was because we borrowed a system from Britain, which basically said, hey, what if we pair people's income to assets like stocks, which appreciate with inflation? That way they can keep up with all the growth. And these are your 401ks, your Roth IRAs. These are different financial vehicles that we still use today. So what occurs here is real wages don't actually rise, but asset prices do. And what this does is it actually creates this giant wealth gap, which is a huge conversation today. Of course, it's gotten more and more extreme over time. This leads to a massive credit boom in the 1980s. People are out buying houses, stocks, commodities, anything that will keep up with inflation since their wages aren't. And the whole thinking here is like, well, my wages don't go up, so I might as well borrow money to buy assets because they will actually go up. Then comes the mid-1990s, the fall of the Berlin Wall, communism starts to fall apart. Bring us to 1996, which is the WTO, the World Trade Organization. What the World Trade Organization does is it allows companies to outsource their work. Now, this is a big conversation that people like to have because basically what it did is it made American workers have to compete with other workers from other countries that are far cheaper labor, but also more productive, which causes this huge issue because there's also a huge surge of American workforce, and now you just made their competition basically uncompetable for them. And so to really summarize all those effects, what you basically get is persistently high inflation, non-rising wages, and a huge debt burden, which brings us to all the issues that we have in the modern day. A lot of people think a lot of these issues are new, but really this is just a cascading effect of decisions that we've made over the past 100 years. And this brings about our modern day problems. Both the right and the left have different solutions that they would like to use to combat these problems, but neither of them actually seem to fix anything because we've built these up so much to such an extent over so many years that it's a really hard problem to tackle. And so let's kind of bring all this back to the modern day. Geopolitical tensions are high. We're breaking off old treaties. We're having to write new ones, new trade agreements, new trade routes, and we're having to deal with what could be a potential retirement crisis. The thing is remember that big generation is still here, and the smaller generations now have to support this much larger generation, which, as we talked about, has higher healthcare costs associated with them. And so our taxes are supposed to pay to support that generation, but they're so much larger that we have to be exponentially more productive. But that need for higher productivity leads to interest in things like AI or robotics or self-driving. And what this does is it causes even more pressures on the workforce that already has to compete on a global market against other participants that far outbid them. And now we can really understand how difficult this situation is to manage if you're a new political leader and you only have 4 years to fix 100 years worth of developing issues. It's quite the problem to solve. And my big goal here is to help you better navigate what's going on in today's world by using those historical references for what's occurred in the past. So when you hear people talk about gold, maybe remember all the things that made us break away from the gold standard, and maybe you can use that to help develop your framework for how you understand crypto and the solutions that it can solve, although they are more diverse than just being used as a currency. Keep that in mind. And gold also as a store of value means that Bitcoin's the main contender for that. Of course, we'll have other classes where we cover crypto in more detail. We do have some older ones. I'm hoping to do some updates on those. We'll also have lots of other future classes. I have one where I want to break down the psychology of trading and investing, but from a neurological standpoint, using my science background to help hopefully provide some more clarity to how you can understand your mind and the way that it works, or how you can better optimize yourself for learning new topics. Anyways, I hope you found all this enjoyable. Please subscribe, like the video, so that you can follow new educational updates from us, or even check out maybe our other social media pages. Join the Discord, where I'm always open to answer your questions or to take suggestions for new topics which you would like a quick dive on. Hope you found it enjoyable, and I'll see you on the next episode.